related. And of course, we still have resistance to forced entry and an insect screen test for windows, but they are now performed in some cases with reference to different standards. And the insect screen test is actually in the Canadian supplement and not within NAFS. But the real new item, over and above the terminology we've been talking about, is an entirely new property that we've never had in Canada for describing an aspect of windows and doors, and that's product class or performance product class. And there's 4 of these: R, LC, CW, AW. We're going to take about 5 minutes later in this presentation to go over what performance class is, what its purpose is, and just to help you wrap your heads around it, because it is a concept that's new to us in Canada, even though it's been around in the States for a decade or more. So, no more ABC ratings. We're talking performance class, performance grade, water penetration test pressure, and air infiltration, exfiltration level. These are the properties now we're talking about with regard to performance ratings. And these are summarized in Table 3 within NAFS. And here's what we're seeing. We have performance grades ranging from 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, all the way to 100. And each performance grade means that you've successfully passed several tests. Essentially, what used to be our B rating is a minimum water penetration test here, and what used to be our C rating is captured in the design pressure test and structural test. So to achieve a performance grade, you have to essentially get to the point of developing a minimum B and C rating for your product. A PG 30 product has designed for a design pressure of 30 psf or 1440 pascals. It has to pass a structural test at a 50% higher pressure, and it has to achieve a minimum level of water tightness of 220 pascals. So a performance grade means you've done all of that. It's not just design pressure, but you choose performance grade on the basis of whatever design pressure is that you need to have. In the US, a performance grade is all you need to describe your product's performance. When you say I have a PG 20 product, a PG 30, a PG 50 product, it means that that's all that's required to be specified. And that's because in the US, they don't have a good way of determining what level of water penetration you need. They just make it a percentage of the design pressure, 15 or 20%, depending on the product class. In Canada, we've always had the ability to specify water penetration performance independently of structural performance. And so as NAFS is implemented in Canada, we specify performance grade, but we specify water penetration separately, because in some cases that water penetration will have to be higher than the water penetration test that's built into the performance grade. So in Canada, we specify both these properties independently, and we'll give you an example of how that works later on. And as I mentioned, the water penetration can be higher than what is in the performance grade. So here's an example. We're looking at that same table from NAFS that I just showed you a moment ago. And let's say that we've determined, using the Canadian supplement, that our design pressure is 2,280 pascals. What performance grade of product do I need? Well, you would start off by looking up what's the closest value in this table under design pressure. I have options. 2160 or 2400. By the way, these are the allowable categories in which you can report these properties. You can't ask for a 2000 Pascal design pressure because NAFS requires you to choose between these available categories. So if I have a design wind load condition of 2280 pascals, I need a 2400 Pascal product. I need a product with that level of structural performance. And let's say that I've done my calculations in the Canadian supplement and I've determined my level of water penetration it's called your specified driving rain wind pressure, is 304 pascals. Great. I look up the next highest value in the table. And I notice something here. The level of water penetration that I need, this is for a building in Abbotsford, this example, pretty dry area. I only need this much water penetration resistance, but I need this performance grade for structural. According to NAFS, that product doesn't exist, because if a product achieves a performance grade of PG50 that has a design pressure capacity of 2400 pascals, it must also be tested to a water penetration of 360 pascals. That's by definition what a performance grade is. So if you're specifying this product, you need to bump up the water penetration resistance you're asking for to the water penetration resistance that goes with PG50. And that would be 360 pascals. So your minimum performance grade is PG50, or you could specify that in metric units as PG 2400 metric, and a water test pressure of 360 pascals. So if you're a specifier, that is how you would specify what you need in the way of performance. As a window manufacturer or door manufacturer, you would have to have a product available, if you want to sell it for this project, that has at least a PG50 structural rating and at least a 360 water penetration rating, a PG50 product. If your product only tests to a water rating of 330, it can't be a PG50. By definition, your lab will rate it as a PG45. So it would not even be eligible for consideration. Of course, you could have the opposite situation as well. Your design pressure is 2280, but your specified driving rain wind pressure is 390. So this is the minimum performance grade for my design pressure, but I need a specified driving rain wind pressure of 390. What do I do? Does that mean I have to bump up to a PG55 product? No. As I've said, in Canada we specify the water penetration separately. It can't be less than the water penetration of the performance grade, but it can be more. So what you would ask for in a specification is a PG50 product with a minimum performance grade PG50, but a water test pressure of 400, because that is the next allowable category that you can use for specifying or reporting a product's performance. And the same goes in reverse to no, we'll leave that at that. Here's kind of an overlay of our B ratings on top of what the NAFS performance grades are. So as you can see, we have 19 rows here from R15 to, from PG15 to 100. We used to have only 7 categories of water penetration. So this is beneficial in that, you know, previously a product that had a water penetration rating of 490, it wouldn't be a B5, it would be rated as a B4, but now of course it could be rated as a 470. So you've got more increments with which to specify your water penetration resistance. Similarly, here's an overlay of our old C1 to C5 ratings on top of the NAFS performance grades. Essentially, we're using new terminology to describe these properties, and we have more options, more increments in which to specify them, but we must always be using the values in this table for that purpose. So that covers performance grade. Now, performance class. What is performance class? We have 4, R, LC, CW, and AW. And I like to think of these as light duty, medium duty, heavy duty, and severe duty categorizations. This, you won't find it in the NAFS standard, but in earlier versions of the American specifications that this standard is based on, R stood for residential, LC for light commercial, CW for commercial window, and AW for architectural window. And that gives you a hint as to what the intended application of performance class was intended to be. Now, performance class is not a code requirement. So you need to be really clear about that. NAFS has given us a property called performance class. You have to use it when you're testing products. When you're testing a product under NAFS, you have to determine which performance class it falls into based on how it passes a series of tests. So the standard requires us to classify products according to these classes, but the building code doesn't require us to use that property. That property is, you might say, over and above, because performance grade handles what the code wants us to do. The code wants us to provide a level of structural performance, a level of water tightness, a level of air tightness. These things are captured in your performance grade, so that satisfies the code. The minimum in the code is performance class R. That's the code's way of saying performance class is not in the code, because you can't have anything if you can't have R. With the exception of special products, like I said, folding doors, there's no performance class definition for them, so a folding door would not have a performance class. But any product that is in NAFS with a performance class definition must be rated according to performance class. So it's optional. And the use of the higher performance class is up to the architect or specifier. So here's how NAFS describes it. They talk about general suggestions for use. And basically what they're saying is you choose a product on the basis of performance grade, but there are times you might want to consider choosing products that have these performance class properties. And the suggested applications for R class products in NAFS are 1 and 2 family dwellings. For LC, low-rise and mid-rise multifamily dwellings and other buildings where larger sizes and higher loading requirements are expected. CW, again, low-rise and mid-rise where even larger sizes and even higher loading requirements are expected, as well as limits on deflection, as well as heavy use. And AW, mid and high-rise buildings to meet increased loading requirements and limits on deflection, and in buildings where frequent and extreme use of the fenestration products is expected. Now, this connotation of light duty to severe duty, this is my words for describing it. But when we explain a little more about what goes into performance class, I think you'll agree that's a good way of thinking about it. And this reminds me of a question an architect put to me years ago when I was writing some specifications. He said, how can I specify a more solid, beefy window? All I've got to work with is ABC ratings. I've got a high-rise building, it's going to be 20 stories high, and I want these windows to be something more solid than your flimsiest residential windows. But if I just specify ABC ratings, there's no way to narrow down the available products to give me something more solid. And it's true, we didn't have that property before in Canada. However, how many of you were frustrated by dealing with BC housing specifications where the environment required an A1, B2, C2 window, and they wanted a B5 window and a C5 window? Well, what were they doing? They wanted you to over-design the window, and they wanted you to over-test it so that it was more durable for use in public housing projects. They were trying to get at performance class. We didn't have performance class in Canada, and the only way to get it was to really over-design the product and test it to those over-the-top requirements to ensure that they would be more solid and durable. And that's really the idea behind performance class. So NAFS requires us to classify products that way. These performance class requirements are defined by something called gateway requirements, in which there's a minimum test size for each class, a minimum performance grade for each class, and successful completion of additional tests. So this is a property now available to architects or BC Housing once they figure out that it's there. I don't believe they're aware of it yet. To give them the ability to specify that product that can take more abuse, the product that can be stiff and solid and robust. So let's take a closer look at what goes into performance class. I've made diagrams here to show you the minimum test size differences for as you go from R to LC to CW to AW. And you'll notice that to qualify a product for R, the minimum test size isn't that large. As you go up from one class to the next, the size of the product you're testing has to be bigger. Even if you're going to sell the customer this size window in the end, but if you have specified an AW window, even if it's this big, it has to be built the same way as the one that was tested at this larger size. The other thing you'll notice is that the minimum design pressure goes up from roughly 15 PSF to 25 PSF to 30 PSF to 40 PSF. In pascals, that's 720 to 1200, 1440 to 1920. So to qualify a window as an AW window, you've got to test it at the AW size or larger, and you've got to test it at this minimum pressure. You can test to a higher pressure if you want, but you have to test to this pressure. And when it comes to CW and AW, you also have to respect deflection limit of L over 175 in those design pressure tests. So that's what it looks like with fixed windows. There's awning windows, casement windows, vertical sliding windows. Look at the size of those windows. This would be your high-rise building in New York, right? You've got these tall windows on the Empire State Building or whatever. But there's a big difference in how this window is built compared to this one or this one, right? Just based on the fact that you're testing this big size at a much higher pressure. So this is part of what goes into making CW, LC, CW, and AW products more heavy duty and more durable than R and LC. Sliding doors, side hinge doors. So that's one part of it. You've got to pass these grueling tests to get into a higher product class. But there's a whole bunch of other tests that stress the product in various ways, and many of these other tests are part of what goes into whether or not a product classifies, is acceptable for your higher classes like CW and AW. So it's a combination of tests, and there are actually 6 pages of tables in NAFS that specify the requirements for every one of those 30 product types, which performance classes they're eligible for, and what the requirements are to qualify them for such a performance class. Again, as an architect, as a builder, you don't